Please excuse the interruption while I share some important information about the Sunday Morning Coffee Podcast. If you would like to support the show, and believe me, I appreciate you supporting the show just by watching, there are a couple of ways that you can help out. You can visit our Patreon page at patreon.com/smcpod. That's patreon.com/smcpod, where for just $4 a month, you can receive early access to episodes and subscriber-only content. If you prefer to make a one-time donation instead of a monthly donation, you can head over to buymeacoffee.com/smcpod. I'm not going to spell that one out, but it's spelled exactly as it sounds. buymeacoffee.com/smcpod, where you can make a one-time donation in any amount. Your support does not go unnoticed. Thank you for watching. Thank you for your support, and I hope you enjoy the rest of today's episode. Very happy to welcome Daniel Laby to the Sunday Morning Coffee Podcast. Daniel, thank you for joining me, especially on short notice. I appreciate your time.
Thanks, Scott. Looking forward to it. It's going to be a fun talk.
It sure will be. So I always ask my guests just to give a little bit of background about yourself, where you're from, how you ended up down the path that led you to where you are.
For sure. So I'm an ophthalmologist, medical eye doctor, MD, and it all happened by accident, to tell you the truth. It was in my fellowship training at UCLA in Los Angeles, and the program director had a project that had to get done, and we were required to finish a project during our fellowship there. And it happened to have to do with baseball, work they had done the previous year with the LA Dodgers. And I didn't really want to do it. I wanted my own project that I started from the beginning, and I created and did the whole thing. But he was, no, we want this done. Negotiate a little bit. Came to the point that I said, I'll do it if I get to be first on the paper that we're going to publish about this in the scientific literature. So we agreed, and I got into it, and it was like, wow, this is interesting. And kept doing it. And then season after season, Dodgers had us back again and again and again. After that, other teams heard about the work we'd done and got us into them. And now we're spending 5 or 6 weeks every spring in Florida and Arizona, looking at more and more players.
That's like every baseball fan's dream, to spend 5 or 6 weeks at spring training.
Well, when you live in New York City and you get to go to Arizona and Florida, you don't complain too much about missing February and March.
Absolutely. I'm in Canada, so I can 100% understand what you're talking about there. So before all this started, were you a baseball fan going into it?
Well, growing up, Little League, I played Little League and so forth. I was usually the last person chosen for the team because I wasn't very athletic. Probably one of the reasons I went to medical school. And, never really enjoyed watching it. I had some favorite teams, didn't really spend too much time with it. To tell you the truth, right now I don't watch certainly every game. I would spend my whole day watching for all the teams we take care of, and then I've taken care of athletes in Europe. I have to watch those games. I would have no time to do anything, so I don't watch very many games. I do watch the finals of the season, whether it's the World Series and so forth, because that's really exciting. And I'm usually rooting for my team to win because in the last several years, almost every year, we've had teams in the playoffs and into the World Series. We had the team last year that won the World Series, the Rangers, one of the teams we work with for the past several years. And in fact, I'll give you a little piece of trivia. There is no one alive. Alive is important qualification here. No one alive that has more World Series championships than I do.
There you go. Who cares? The Yankees, Daniel Laby, number one, right? So
they're alive, yes.
Yeah, go into a little bit about what that initial project was that led you down this road.
Yeah, so it was work with the Dodgers, and I was doing a fellowship in pediatric ophthalmology, so the eye care of children. And one of the doctors from the Dodgers was seeing the chief of the department that I was in, and there was a lot of crossover with pediatrics, taking care of kids' vision, and athletes' vision. If you think about the other departments, and this is UCLA, one of major medical centers in Los Angeles, you look at the other departments. The players don't have cataracts, so going to the cataract department didn't really make a lot of sense. They don't really have retinal problems, although we published a paper a few years ago about different findings we found in the players by accident, but nothing special there. They don't have any of the other things that you would expect to find in the departments, except for in pediatrics. We're interested in how vision develops and how people use their vision to perform, and how kids' vision has to be used to develop normally. And so there was a lot of overlap in how we test and what we think that had to do with the baseball players. I think that's how that initial connection was made the year before I actually came to UCLA. And it evolved from simply testing vision. And in fact, it's evolved a lot, and we can get into that later. The eye chart that you go into the doctor's office that has row after row of letter is probably a terrible way to check people's vision. We use a completely different method now. Onto how the brain uses visual information to make a decision, and then learning how the brain uses that vision to make a motor action. And if you think about, hitting a baseball, or kicking a soccer ball, or shooting a basket with a basketball, or hockey, whatever sport you're talking about, it's not just what you see. You have to be able to act on what you see. You have to decide about what to do, then act on what you see to make perfectly timed motor action to score a goal, if you will. So it's really the whole scenario that becomes important.
And baseball is, out of all those sports that you mentioned, and out of all the sports, period, is kind of a special case, because the time period in which the hitter is seeing the ball, making that decision, and telling his body to swing is the blink of an eye. So do you find, as part of your work, do you find that baseball players, hitters especially, is there something special about their vision, about the way they process things, that regular people don't possess?
Well, it's all the above, actually. Their vision, our first paper we published in 1996, was what's the average vision of a professional baseball player. The average vision would be 20 over 20, and in metrics maybe 6 over 6 meters, but 20 feet over 20 feet, that's normal. If someone's 20/40, for example, that means they can see from 40 feet what this patient can see from 20 feet. So, the normal person sees 20 feet further away the same target. So that's not very good if you have to be closer to see it. Now, the baseball players, you think 20/20 is like normal vision. It's normal vision for the population. It's not the best possible vision. I wouldn't, if I had 20/20, I wouldn't brag about it really, because it's just average. But the baseball players didn't have 20/15, which is the next row on the eye chart, the next row down. That they saw perfectly. They saw half of the next row, which is 20/10. And so their average vision is 20 over 12, meaning they can see 8 feet further than the average person, like me, the average person on the street. Even though I'm wearing glasses and I'm corrected very nicely, I'm not as good as a baseball player. And that's just the vision part of it. And as I mentioned, that's the eye chart, which is not a great way to measure vision. And your point about how long they have to see the ball, it takes a 90-mile-an-hour fastball about 400 milliseconds, 4/10 of a second, less than half a second, to go from the pitcher's hand to the catcher's glove. Now, you have to think it takes time to swing the bat, right? That takes about 150 milliseconds. So you're left with a quarter of a second where you have to see it, decide what pitch it is, and initiate the motor action in a quarter of a second. Human blink is 300 milliseconds. So the blink is longer than what you have to decide about hitting a 90-mile-an-hour fastball. Now, if you're facing a pitcher like Aroldis Chapman, who throws 106, 105 miles an hour, that 250 milliseconds becomes like 200 milliseconds, even shorter time. That's why he's effective, because most of those guys can't really act that fast. They can't decide. And so what we do in our vision tests, for example, is we have targets that are small, because it's important to be able to see small things. We have targets that are low contrast, that aren't black on white, like you would see on the eye chart. They're gray on white. They're off-white on white. They're very low contrast. And if you think about the seams of the ball, where the batter has to see the spin of the ball to figure out what pitch it is, it's not a black seams on a white ball. It's a red seam on a white ball. The ball may be scuffed a little bit. The pitcher's fingers on the ball aren't black on white either. They're going to be, tan or some version of a little darker skin color. And then you don't have much time to look at it. So we show these targets on the screen for a very short time. So our vision tests involve small, faint targets that are only seen for 300, 500 milliseconds. And from that, they have to say what they're seeing to get credit for it. Much different than the eye chart, where you can spend 30 seconds looking at the letters that are black on white. You can change your answer if you want.
You can guess.
You can guess, and so forth. So we wanted to test in real life situations, and we found correlations between the results on that test and batting at the plate in the on game in-game situation. We do hand-eye coordination reaction times, correlates to performance on the field. We have concentration tests that correlate to performance on the field. And so we want to approach in a scientific way where we get the data, we see if it works. If that works, then we use that test to evaluate somebody, and then we teach them how to correct their problem, or we give them glasses or contacts and so forth.
And is there any leeway or any consideration given? Because, of course, depending on the ballpark, the time of year, the sun could be playing, the pitcher could be, you often hear he's throwing from the shade into the sun or from the sun into the shade. So, for a batter to see that, a ball in the shade, and then all of a sudden it's in the sun, you got to take all of that into consideration. So is there any consideration given to that in your work?
Yeah, we look at the contrast, and that, dark to light or light to dark is a contrast issue. So we certainly look at the contrast. In the past, we actually used glare. We had bright lights that were shining in the face of the athlete as they were trying to do the vision test to try to recreate some of that. It's hard to get that consistent from player to player. We do test in a fairly consistent environment, and sometimes it reflects a little better to what's happening in the field. Day game versus night game. We talk about day-night splits quite often. People can be, if they have a split like that, it often means they have a small prescription they need to correct the vision. Even though I see great, doc, and then you get them in there and they're 20/20, and we'll say, yeah, you're great if you weren't in the field. If you were a normal person, Harry Potter Muggle, you'd be fine. But if you were as a professional baseball player, you need better than that. And it reflects in darkness in night games with the glare at night and the lower light levels. It reflects, the poor vision reflects much more there, and we see that much more.
And everybody, like you mentioned off the top, which I honestly didn't really know, is that, everyone says, oh, I've got 20/20 vision, which everybody thinks is perfect, which you have just said, no, that is not. So if a player comes to you and he has 20 or she has 20/20 vision, so are you saying that they will get a prescription to improve that vision to 2012 or 2015? Or so what is the, I guess the prescriptions vary based on the player, but is there kind of a common route that the players go, or does it depend on how they react to light versus darker, et cetera?
Yeah, that's a great question. Get my train of thought back here. These guys are very sensitive to small corrections. But even before we talk about that, if you think about vision, there's two parts to vision, just like there's two parts to the picture that comes out of a camera. There's the lens focus, and there's the film itself. The film has to be perfect, and the lens focus has to be perfect if you want a perfect picture. Think about the film as the brain, the vision part of the brain. Think about the lens focusing on the camera as what the correction or the focus of your eye is. There are people that see 20/20 and we can't improve with a lens because they don't have a problem with the focus. They have a problem, in quotations, with their brain, right? 20/20 is normal, so you don't have a problem in your brain. But if we're trying to get you better than that, your brain just can't go better than that. And so we can't improve that person pretty much. There's some special cases, but pretty much can't get them better than 20/20. On the flip side, if somebody has the potential in their brain to see 20/10, let's say, but they're not seeing it because there's a focus issue, now we have work to do, and we can give them a lens, contact lens, glasses, and so forth to get that focus perfect. So now the brain and focus are both perfect, and we have excellent vision. And so that's kind of the consideration you have to make. So we can't really test the brain to see what that's able to do. So anyone who doesn't see well, we try to get them focused. And we've had 2 or 3 players this past spring in the 500 or so that we've seen in the last several weeks that we couldn't improve. And there are people that didn't have a real focus problem. They had a brain, I won't say a brain problem because it's not a brain problem, but
right.
That's what was the limiting factor, was their visual abilities there higher up in the development of vision as opposed to what the eyes are seeing. Now, one of the interesting things is these players are very sensitive to small prescriptions. It's very interesting. They're what I found interesting over the last 30 years that studying these athletes is that they're a special case visual human, if you will. Almost everything that their eyes do is different than what you or I might do. If I give them a very small prescription that you or I might not even notice makes any difference in the vision, they're like, oh my God, doc, that's wonderful. I can see everything. And boom, 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 they see everything. Whereas you or I may not have that experience. And the prescriptions usually are very small amounts of astigmatism. Usually it's not extreme nearsightedness or farsightedness, it's astigmatism in a relatively small amount that makes this big difference for them. We've seen it in other things as well. We've seen it in how steady their eyes are looking at a target versus you or I, where our eyes may move more, their eyes move less. We see it in terms of some regards to their balance. If you think about if you're trying to keep your balance, it's kind of hard to pay attention to something that's really small and hard to see. But these guys are really steady, so they're able to see these small things that for us may be more difficult. So they're really kind of special case visual people, and that's kind of fun. It's fun every year to kind of discover a new skill that these guys have that we don't have.
Have you ever? We know that athletes are finely tuned machines, and they are very detail oriented. They are very routine oriented. We know that we've heard stories of he changed his swing a little bit and it didn't work. He got into a slump, so he went back to. Do you ever find that when a baseball player that you're working with, when you give them that little prescription, have there been instances where it takes them a little while to adjust to that change in vision on a positive way?
Well, positive way and a negative way to some extent. If you think the ultimate case of seeing very poorly, things are blurry, things move kind of slower. You don't really pick up fine differences in movement until it's a gross difference that you obviously now can recognize something's changed. When you give them the correction, that you get very, very sharp vision, and so it basically speeds everything up. And we've had a couple examples of players, one this season, I can think of two others before that were very hesitant to wear the corrections, certainly on the field. These are, for example, shortstops or middle infielders that getting ground balls a lot, and their timing of watching, the ball bouncing and the hops to catch it was off because things were sharper and faster, and now their timing is off. We've had players who only wear the correction to bat and didn't wear it on the field. For example, and I can talk about players who have talked about their eyes and their experiences in the public media. I can talk about them. I can't talk about obviously players that haven't, this confidential information.
Sure.
But one player in 2013, 2018, I forget already. Name is J.D. Drew. He played for the Red Sox that year. It was a World Series, and he was having a terrible time. They brought him into the office. I was in Boston. Then they brought him into my Boston office with the Red Sox. When they came back, I think from St. Louis after Game 5 for Game 6, which was going to be at Fenway Park the next day. And they brought him because he was batting very poorly. It was like .017 batting average, something to that effect. It was very poor, 1 for 17. Fielding was okay, but the batting was terrible. So it was almost a kind of a guaranteed out, and they needed to fix the lineup if they wanted to win the World Series. They brought him in. I looked at him, found that he needed some contact lenses, and prescribed the contacts, gave him some samples for the next night for the game. And he wore them, and he found that he just couldn't handle the speed. When he was in the infield, he couldn't handle the speed of the ball. So he had the trainer put the contact lenses on his eyes in the tunnel prior to each at bat, and he took them out after the at bat. Well, he batted that day 3 or 4 times. He got once was a ball that he hit that was caught by a diving catch from the first baseman. So that would have been it was a good hit, but just a good catch. One was, I think, a double, and the other one was a home run. And so his batting average soared 2 for 4 that day, from terrible to 500, which is very good. But he was effective. That was the main thing. And in that game, actually, the Red Sox won the World Series. His home run sort of clinched the score that game. So he did very well, but he couldn't wear them on the field. He had to have them put on, prior to batting. And we've seen that quite a bit. I had a player this spring already that the same sort of thing. That it's a very good player, has a small correction. Actually had some contacts in the past, and he was afraid his timing at the plate would be off, and he wouldn't be able to perform as well batting as he had previously, and didn't want to obviously interfere with that. So we definitely see that. Did
you get a World Series ring out of that, or no?
Oh yeah. I have my safe deposit box is full of rings, and my wife's told me that I can't have any more because there's no more room in the box.
That's awesome. So after the initial project with the Dodgers, how did you come to begin working with the other teams? Was it Was it the old, it gets through the grapevine that, hey, the Dodgers are doing this and they're having success with it? Because we all know sports teams are kind of a monkey see, monkey do thing. If they see another team with an edge, now they're going to want that edge too, obviously. Is that kind of how it worked, or did you approach teams, or how did it go?
Well, it was actually both ways. They're in the 30 years, that I've been doing this, the field and the interest in what we're doing has skyrocketed. The curve has been logarithmic. Whereas now almost every team, certainly every successful team, has interest in this area and has not only in the vision part of it, but in sports science in general, and projection models and all the different things you can think of modern statistics, if you will. So it kind of started out after the Dodgers. The Red Sox were the next team that we worked with. And that was a sort of word of mouth type of thing. That one of the coaches had heard about me, spoke with me, and then he wanted to bring it into the Red Sox organization. So spoke to them. I went up there in the between the 2003-2004 season and spoke with the front office, Theo Epstein, and so forth. And they liked what they heard and asked me to come to spring training that spring. We did a lot of work with the players at that point, and that was the year the Red Sox won the World Series after 80-something years of a drought. That helped a lot the business because now, that was the first World Series ring that we had. With the Red Sox, we have 4 more World Series victories with them. And then teams started to hear about what I do. That made it a little bit easier to reach out, to connect, and to kind of get involved. And we've worked with well over, I'd probably say close to half of MLB teams at some point or another. As I say, 8 World Series championships since 2004. So that's 8 out of 20 years. That's a pretty good number. And if we look at the postseason, almost every year our teams are in the postseason. They usually get to the league championships, and it depends what's happening beyond that. And I think it's important to note that it's not just the vision that's letting these people win World Series, right?
Yeah.
I think we're a reflection of the mindset of the club. When the club thinks about these sorts of things, which include vision, they become much more successful, both in terms of development of players, in terms of making sure the players they have, are seeing optimally, that they are, performing at their best. And that's, I think, so we're a canary in the coal mine, I'll call it. If you have us in there's a good chance you're going to win. And you have it not because we're there, because you're thinking about these sorts of things. You're doing everything in that direction to be successful.
Yes, they have, pardon the pun, they have vision, maybe that some other teams don't have. And because we know also that sports, baseball is very fine margin. So if they can get a 1% or a 0.5% edge that they didn't have before, that could mean the difference between winning the World Series or losing it, or making the World Series or not.
Yeah, we look at the vision tests, and we can using statistics project a change in vision, how that affects players' walk rate, for example, and think about how many times the players at bat and how many at bats before they walk. And you look at the 2 groups. This is from a paper we published a couple of years ago, and you see that those who have better vision walk twice as often as those who have poor vision. Well, if that's the case, you look at your lineup. If they're going to walk twice as often, you're going to score X number of more runs. If you do that, you win X number of more games. And if you win X number of more games, your chances of being in the postseason become much, much greater. So these are all these vision materials are all used for projection and correction as well.
I played ball, not at any level at all, just for fun. But obviously, when you're out in the field, when your teammates are batting, good eye. And, now I know literally that, it goes from good eye to better eye, and that can make such a difference.
Well, it's interesting is, it seems so obvious that vision is a critical piece of sports performance, not just baseball, but, I've had teams, I've been to Olympic games in Beijing and in Tokyo. And it's not just, baseball, it's many, many sports. We published a paper about different visual abilities, different sports. I've worked with a player in the English Premier League at Liverpool, Trent Alexander-Arnold.
My favorite team, actually.
Oh, a very good team.
Yeah.
And Trent is a very good player.
Oh, one of the best, yes.
And when you look at the visual requirements for that sport, it's different than baseball. It's not better or worse. It's just different requirements. there's no baseball player that can do with their feet what Trent does with his feet, in terms of controlling a ball and putting it in the right place at the right time. And so each sport is different. And if you think about it that way, then it's the way medicine works, right? Someone comes to the doctor with a complaint, you treat them based on their complaint. You don't give everybody the same medication, the same pill. If there's a doctor like that, you probably shouldn't go to that doctor. You should go to someone who targets the treatment based on the evidence, right? Evidence-based care. And so sports are the same way, not just in the position of a single sport, but in each sport, to understand and to apply and to evaluate, if you will, what's important for someone in that sport to perform well. And you would think that it's so intuitively obvious that every sport would want this to happen. But I spent quite a bit of time trying to work with professional soccer teams or football teams. It's very difficult. I don't know why, especially after Red Bull made this 47-minute documentary about my work with Trent Alexander-Arnold, going through all the vision stuff, everything we did. We challenged him. We trained him. I trained him actually remotely. I was in here in spring training, actually. He was in Liverpool. We trained via Zoom. It's all recorded. It's a wonderful documentary on Red Bull's website. It's a free view. You don't have to pay anything for it. And if you're interested in vision and sports, if you're interested in Liverpool or soccer or football, that's a great thing to watch to understand. After that, I thought people would be knocking on my door to come help them perform better, and it's been very tough. I have no idea why. I don't know if it has to do that I'm in the United States, and soccer, football is Americans are less regarded as, let's say, abroad, and when we're talking about soccer and football. I don't know, but if you have any connections, have them give me a buzz, because I'd love to bring my skill in baseball and in many sports, as well as what I did with Trent, to that club.
I wish I had some connections with them. But so how did that come about that you ended up working with Trent Alexander-Arnold? Was it a situation where he and his camp approached you? Did you approach the club? How did that come about?
Yeah, that was actually Red Bull. So Red Bull, is very interested in athletic performance. They have a whole Red Bull Athletic Center in Austria. And so they wanted to create a documentary about vision in sport. Trent is a Red Bull sponsored athlete. And so what they did is kind of join the two of us together and, basically pay for the entire project. So it was very well produced. We spent pre-COVID, during the COVID, and just after COVID, getting this all done. It was, I think it's a really good, if you really want to get it in 47 minutes, understand vision in football, soccer. It's a wonderful introduction, and then Red Bull has lots of different videos in different areas, but this is a great one for vision.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. Check that out.
Yeah.
So was there any follow-up between yourself and Liverpool Football Club to do anything further, or was it kind of a one-off just because it was Trent and through Red Bull?
Well, I've been in touch with Trent, through texting and so forth. But in terms of the club itself, you would think that it would be a shoo-in, because I've been with the Red Sox, by that point, 15 years. This year's 20 years, so it's probably 15, 16 years with the Red Sox. And if the Red Sox are owned by
the same company,
the same organization, right? So I actually spoke to the head of the Fenway Sports Group, because I know them from the Red Sox. He spoke to Liverpool, and they were kind of like, well, we can't, hands off type of thing. And so Fenway Sports Group couldn't really, I guess they could if they wanted to, but I guess I'm not that important to have them force it. And Jurgen Klopp had some people from Germany coming in that were doing some things that weren't the same, but some similar things. And so I think under the current regime, if you will, there isn't a place for what I do. Perhaps next season, as the management changes, we'll say, maybe that will be the case.
Well, if you're ever texting with Trent, ask if he'd like to come on my podcast and talk about. So obviously, like you said, two different sports completely. What differences are there in the work that you would do with a Trent Alexander-Arnold, and what what kind of things are you looking for vision wise, and what improvements can you make there like you do with baseball players?
Yeah. So, the way we approach this is through something I call the sports vision pyramid. It kind of looks like a pyramid there. And a pyramid stands for many years. Think of the Egyptian pyramids and the pyramids in South America and so forth. They stand because they have a very, wide base, and they taper to the top. They're very stable shapes. Well, vision, the same thing. So we start at the bottom of that pyramid for vision. Sports vision has to do with how well you see, like we talked about earlier, the 2020, 2010, 2012 number. Well, here we have the first difference, because the baseball players had to pick up a very small target at a great distance that has some spin to it, and they have to do it very quickly. If we're talking for Trent has a much bigger ball moving at a much slower speed. The distances can be great, but it's not so much the spin and things that are going to tell you where the ball is going to land. Whereas in baseball, the movement of the ball is fully dependent on the spin of the ball. And so the visual requirement in baseball, let's say, is 2015 or better. In soccer or football, it'd be 2020 or better. And so we don't want someone seeing worse than that. So if I have Trent let's say somebody else comes in 2020 and they're playing baseball, you need help. They come in 2020 and they're playing soccer, football, your vision's adequate. We don't have to do really anything to correct that part of it. Then we look at how the brain uses two eyes together, and that's 3D depth perception. Well, here we have a big difference again, because the baseball players, to judge a baseball, depth perception has no role. You don't need to be able to, in order to figure out to swing or not at the pitched ball, it's not a question of depth for many reasons. But if you're a soccer footballer, when you're one-on-one with somebody and you're trying to get past them, depth becomes critical. Mm-hmm. And so there's a difference there as well. Then we look at how someone's going to, react, right? Obviously, hands versus feet is an obvious difference, but you don't have to have fast hand reaction time. You have to have fast foot reaction time, and vice versa, depending on the sport. So that's going to be a different kind of test. We're not going to test the hands at all, frankly, except for maybe a goalkeeper. But someone on the pitch itself, we're not going to test their hands. We'll look at their feet, and we'll look at their ability to react to something with their feet, to inhibit a go no go type decision with their feet. We'll look at for the baseball player, it will be a similar type of thing, but with the hands. If we look at something else that we call the quiet eye, we have a pair of glasses that we can use to track what a player is looking at. So that system gives us a video where we see the scene that they're looking at, and we see where in that scene they were looking with each of their eyes. And so we can track that. And that becomes important as well. If you think about, there's very famous videos, I think from Sky Sports, maybe a few years back with Ronaldo, where he was able to get by basically anyone they put at him, because Ronaldo was not looking at the feet, he was looking at the hips. And based on where the hips are moving, he was knowing where the ball was going to be next. Well, in baseball, is a similar type thing. It's not so much looking at the hips, but it's looking at where the ball is going to be released, having your eye at the right time at the right place. In basketball, that's been shown. We had published a paper with the NBA team that we took care of about where to look when you're shooting baskets. It's been demonstrated for putters in golf and golf in general. It's something called the quiet eye, and it's really critical, but it's different in each sport. So there's lots of differences, lots of different ways you would evaluate and intervene if needed.
And I guess if you're working with, like you said earlier, Olympic athletes, we know there are so many different Olympic events that you could work with 5 different Olympic athletes in 5 different sports, and it would be 5 different things that you're looking for and looking to correct.
Yeah. So for the Beijing Games, for the Beijing Games, we did 11 different sports within the U.S. Olympic team. And for Beijing, and also some of those sports are winter sports, so for the Winter Games following. And each one was different. The only one that kind of didn't have that much critical vision was track and field, or running track. But speed skaters, it was critical. Certainly softball was critical. Soccer was critical. All the different sports you can think of. We published a paper about that, actually, after the Beijing Games, where we gave the vision results of all the different sports that we worked with. And there's quite difference. For example, boxers. The boxers didn't need to have very good vision, but they had very good depth perception. Kind of makes sense. You have to be able to know when the jab is coming.
Yeah.
On the other side, the archers, Olympic archers, had really good vision, but terrible depth perception. Well, I won't say terrible, but it wasn't quite as important because the target for the archer is flat. There's no depth to it. So if you have good depth perception, it's not something you're going to be selected for to help you, get to the Olympic level. It doesn't make a difference. Your vision makes a difference, but not the depth. Whereas a boxer, if you had not such great vision, it doesn't really matter. But if you didn't have good depth perception, you're probably going to get zinged enough times, and you're not going to make it to the Olympics. And so each of those different sports is different, and it's almost a profile. One of the things I thought about, let's take a 13-year-old kid who's interested in sports, plays 3 or 4 different sports. Let's measure everything and see what his visual abilities, which ones that matches most closely to allow him the greatest success, and invest the time to train for best performance and best future if he wants to perform well. Almost like a vision profile of a sport.
Right. So with speed skating, would that be what you're looking for? Is it, again, the depth perception? Is it because obviously the ice, there could be glare? What are you looking for when you're working with speed skaters?
Well, the depth and reaction was important because when they, making the turns, you have to judge where the skaters are around you. You have to judge where that turn, little pylon there, where that turn is to go around. And that becomes a very big depth perception issue. And so that kind of stands out as kind of the main skill. Sharpness is important, but it's not like hitting a baseball. Reaction time, somewhat important, but not as much. It's the depth perception because they're all huddled in there close together and they're all moving pretty quickly. You better know exactly where everybody is, how far away they are from you if you don't want to crash.
One sport, obviously, that is the sport here in Canada is hockey. And I would think at the speed that those players are moving, you got the black puck on the white ice, you got everything that's going on. Have you worked with any hockey teams, hockey players, and what is the kind of work that you would do with a hockey player?
So we worked with the LA Kings several years back already. In fact, little kid from used to play in Edmonton named Wayne Gretzky was one of the guys that we took care of there as well.
I've heard of him.
You've heard of him. This team, the Kings, actually, he was on the Kings that year, 1993 or 94, I think it was. Him and actually that whole team of the Kings had a lot of Rob Blake, a lot of good players in there. And we looked at their vision, and they kind of fell between. They weren't quite the same level of visual ability as baseball, but it wasn't too far. And in fact, if we're thinking about sports as a whole, you think about small target, fast moving target sports, hockey, baseball, tennis, right? Compared to sports like basketball or football, soccer, or American football, where it's a bigger target, slower moving, and so forth. And so you can kind of think about the visual skills for tennis, hockey, and baseball as being very similar. The position is important, by the way. Goalkeeper versus other people on the ice, or pitchers versus batters. Big difference in visual needs. Not that one's better than the other, just different, and different interventions for those types of people. But in general, hockey is a tough one because you do have a puck that's going fairly fast. It is high contrast. It's black puck on a white ice, which makes it a little bit easier to see than the baseball scenario. But the puck is moving, not too different speeds than a pitch baseball. The reaction is important. And the biggest difference is now that we have a team. So we're not just talking about hitting a baseball where it's you against the pitcher. You have all these people around you that you need to not only be able to have central vision, but peripheral recognition. It becomes really important. Not just someone's there, but you need to know teammate, not teammate, how they're moving, where they're moving, what's their projected movement. Similar to someone dribbling down the basketball court. And you've seen these guys, basketball players make passes behind their back. They're not looking at the guy and they make a perfect pass. You've seen that in hockey too, I'm sure. And that's because they're mastered this ability to know where the people are, know what their movement is, and they don't have to see them anymore because they know kind of where they're going. And so that is very different than baseball. So there are big differences and there are big similarities. You have to pick out the pieces for the sport.
Let's get back to baseball for a little bit. Talk a little bit about your process in spring training. So do you get there as the players are reporting? Are you there a few days later? And what are the steps that you take when you first meet with a team and you start to meet with the players?
Well, the problem is I can't be everywhere at the same time. So we do start when the players report. In fact, even a little before that, because most of them come to camp earlier than when they're supposed to report. And that's what we did this spring, and that was back in mid-February, and we're still at it. And so I can't see everybody when they first report, and that's what the teams would really like. I do give, first come, first serve. Whoever gets me the dates first is, the ones who are going to get taken care of first. And if there people are slow on getting, deciding on stuff, then they get what's left. Just because it can't be in the same place, same time.
Right.
Usually it involves 2 trips to a club because the major leaguers report, before the minor leaguers. And so we try to, hit them early in their process each spring as we can. To tell you the truth, I prefer to do all this in January, not in March. Because it takes people, and you kind of alluded to earlier, it takes people some time to get used to the correction. And here you have in spring training, people trying to make a team, trying to advance, from single A, double A, triple A, and so forth. And they're not always really interested in doing something that's going to be hard or changing their routine and could jeopardize their chance to advance. In January, we have enough time to get used to what they have, recognize the benefit, and then, apply it, if you will, during the spring. So it gets a little bit complicated. Traditionally, it's spring training is where all this stuff is done, but there are some clubs that are talking about doing it earlier. The big league guys, major league guys, probably aren't around until the spring. But the minor league guys have several camps. They have instructional camps and so forth, and we're spending more and more time in the fall, seeing guys and doing the work there as opposed to saving for the spring.
When you started working with the Dodgers, was it strictly the major league players and then they said, hey, there's something to this, let's get our minor leaguers involved? Or were you working with the whole organization from the beginning? And at this point, how far down the minor league ladder do you go? Do you go rookie ball, single A? How far down the ladder do you work with players?
Well, the Dodgers are everybody. It wasn't so much major league guys. And in fact, to be honest, our impact is greatest not in the major league athlete. If you think about someone who's a major league ball player, they got to that point because they performed, right? They've been able to do well, and the team has seen value in promoting them all the way up there. Really, our value comes in the development process. And in fact, we work with Major League Baseball at the combine that they have every year. We do all the vision testing in the combine, and all that information is sent out to the clubs to see how the players are looking to draft. And then once the draft is over, we'll often see for several clubs all the players they've signed in their initial camps to correct and maximize the vision there. We get to the fall and so forth and see the instructs, the rookie ball and so forth guys correcting them as well. If you think about it, you want to have the vision optimized so that the team can then apply their development, routines, their training programs to somebody who has a chance to soak that in as best as possible. If someone's not seeing well, you can train them to some extent, but they're not going to really get the full potential. And I think that actually is one of the, I'll call it, secrets of the success of a lot of the clubs, because the clubs that we work with tend to have very strong farm systems. And that puts the front office in the position of leverage that they can take lots of players that are doing well and trade them and do whatever they need to do to put together the club they need to win. Whereas if you have a farm system that's kind of weak, no one wants any of those guys. They're weak. And you can't really leverage too much. And so I think what you find is the teams we work with have top group of farm systems because they've been able, we correct the vision, they apply their training systems, players, blossom, if you will, and do well. We look at players before the draft so they can then decide, are they ones they should draft or not? So they only draft people that have a chance of doing well. And all these different things. So our real biggest impact is not with the major league club, although those are the fancy ones we take care of. It's really the minor league development to make sure everybody has the best chance to proceed, to progress, to get the best of their ability to show, to play as well as possible.
And that makes perfect sense. I would also think that because, as we know, your vision changes over time as you start to get older. So players that are hitting that 30, 33, 35 age, where you're starting to wind your career down, maybe, if you working with a player that's 35 years old, his vision changes, you can help him out. He might be able to add, another year, another couple of years to his career. Have you found that over your career that you've helped players extend? And I know you're not going to take sole credit for that, but have you found that that's the case where you can help players extend their careers a little bit?
So one of the funny things in 2003, I told you I went to present to the Red Sox front office. I had a slide deck, and I'm showing slides of what we've done with the Dodgers and how the vision is important and so forth and so on. And I put a picture up there, and I'm talking about the importance of kind of year after year evaluation to pick up changes in vision that could impact performance that we can correct and improve. And I put up there the vision, several years of vision of a player, and it was actually pretty funny. Several years of vision of a player, and then I put underneath that their batting performance over the same period, and things were pretty stable for a while, and then the vision went down, and it went down a little bit, but not too bad. But the performance that year went down. Next year, the vision went down further, and performance went down. We corrected them, and then it went back up again. And I put that up there for this player. And this is a more senior player from the Dodgers. And Theo Epstein, who was the GM of the Red Sox at that point, yells out, says, "Oh, that's Eric Karros." And I'm like, "How do you know that's Eric Karros?" Like, don't want to use names. Because blah 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 blah. He had all the stats.
Knows every statistic, yeah.
of not just this player, but of everybody. He had no idea who it was going to be. He knew just by the statistics. He knew the batting statistics. He knew who the player was, and that to me, I found incredible how one person could actually know all that.
Mm-hmm.
But that was an example of someone who had a little bit dip, brought him back up, and he played several more years. Obviously, went on to a nice career as a commentator and so forth.
Now, have you become like that in a way where you could be given some numbers, from the testing that you do for a certain player and know which player that is?
Oh, I wish I could say I was that smart. My memory of numbers of stats on players is not very good. I have a very nice computer in front of me, and I'm very good at getting what I want out of the computer. And so if you ask me, I can get the answer really quickly. But if you ask me to verbalize it, it wouldn't work too good.
So have you had any players where they were with a team that you work with, they get traded away, they sign as a free agent with a team you're not working with? Have you ever had a player request that you continue working with them on an individual basis, or have you ever had a player convince a team that you're not working with that, like, hey, you might want to take a look at this?
I don't think so, because no team has ever said that they've done that. Although players have mentioned that they've talked to, who've come over, have talked to the team when we end up there, but nothing I would say is definite in that regard. I've had some players I work with when they're no longer on the team I started with them with. Not too many of them. It's interesting. I to some extent, it's not like a trainer who is massaging their bodies, for hours, and they become, I guess, very close at that point. From the vision perspective, it's much more spotty, right? It's checking and so forth. Today we had somebody, for example, that I saw at the camp that we had seen with another club for several years. He's now in this club, and once he came, interestingly enough, his agent called me and brought him over to see me in New York, and we knew each other already. And then I've seen him, since then every year. So it's kind of a little bit of a bond there. He actually lives not too far from my office in New York City, which is kind of funny. But so there is some of that. It's not quite as close a relationship as some of the other people that work with the athletes, I think, because we just don't spend that much time. But there are, there's certainly been circumstances when front offices send players to me that I have nothing to do with the team, but they want me to evaluate. We had one guy that actually lost the signing bonus because his vision was permanently not fixable, which is a bit of a stir. So that happens sometimes. I have some agents that send me players, on occasion.
So if I'm not sure if you can talk about it or not. If not, that's perfectly okay, of course. But which team are you currently working with? And if you can give just sort of an outline of what is your day tomorrow? What does the next couple of days look like for you with the team you're working with?
Yeah. I can't really go into detail about team specifics. In terms of the day, it really varies quite a bit by team. Sometimes we start at 7 a.m. That's kind of earliest. The players get in about 6:37, and we try to get a bunch of them done before the 9 o'clock usual meeting that they have, because they all have to be at the team meeting. From there, they go out to stretch and they go on the field. So we kind of have a lull from 9 to about 11 or so. Some clubs will bring players off the field and then bring them back after we test them. Most clubs, the coaching staff doesn't want to interrupt the program, so we basically 7 to 9 really busy, 9 to 11, 30, 12 kind of not too busy, and then after lunch until maybe 3 or 4 we're busier again. That's kind of a general plan. Tomorrow, I'll tell you exactly tomorrow's schedule. We're starting at 8 o'clock, and we'll be busy until about 11. And then we'll be nothing to do until about 4. And then we'll go for several more hours after 4, seeing more people, and probably repeat that Thursday and Friday, and we finish Friday. And then we're back.
Is there ever any, I don't want to say resistance, but how do players, because as we talked about earlier, they're very routine oriented. They want to do their baseball workouts. They want to do their physical workouts. How do players react, when they are going through this process? I guess it depends, on the player because everybody's different, but is it a general like, oh, this is just something we have to do, or is there an enthusiasm to it? How do they usually react to what you're doing?
It varies as much as the batting averages vary. The people that have had correction that have seen us are pretty eager to come back and check to make sure everything is all right. And frequently, we get to a club, the first ones we see are guys who, that know us from having corrected their vision the year before, and they understand, oh, this made a difference. I'm going to get in there. I'm going to be first to get in there. Then we get into the period, usually with the major league guys, where some will do it, some won't. With the major league collective bargaining agreement, it's their option to come or not to have this sort of vision testing done, this vision work done. So some are like, I'm good enough, I don't need it. And some are like, I want to do everything I can to be as good as possible. If I were them, I would say, do everything you can to be good as possible, perform as much as possible. It's going to lead to more dollars in your pocket. Versus just being what you're doing right now. But sometimes that is an argument that works, sometimes it doesn't. So we often don't see every single major league player on the roster because several often will decline. Unfortunately for them, it doesn't affect me at all, but for them it affects. But that's their option. On the minor league side, it's a little bit more enforceable, we'll say, and so we usually see almost all the minor league players. One, I think they want to do better. And number two, they don't have as much choice, if you will, as the major league guys. Right. But invariably, they're ones that don't want to do it. And the way they don't do it is by making themselves scarce. And so what unfortunately happens frequently is we work really hard, and then the last 6 hours is very slow, because the guys who are left over that we haven't seen are the ones who don't want to do it, and either they hide or they leave early or they who knows what they do, but the staff can't find them and can't bring them in.
Has there been a player that you can mention, of course, that has been a really strong proponent for what you do, that has kind of trumpeted the idea of the kind of work that you do, and maybe even maybe given his teammates a little nudge, like, you should be receptive to this because it's really helped me?
Yeah, there are several like that, and I can't tell you who, but I can tell you about one story that does exemplify that. A few years back, there was a player in the Red Sox named Manny Ramirez. You might remember him.
Oh yeah.
And we saw him in 2004 at spring training, and he was fine. About a month later in June, the head trainer, his name was Jim Rowe at the time of the Red Sox, came or called on the phone and said, Manny feels like he's not seeing the ball. I said, Jim, Manny sees the ball fine. We just saw him a month ago. Vision doesn't change over a month. So all of a sudden, need to have a pair of glasses. He sees the ball fine. And I said, no, he's not so much seeing it. He's not seeing it. Like, Jim, you got to be a little more specific here. I can't really do much here. Well, it ended up being that Manny felt like he wasn't reacting to the ball as he had previously, that he just wasn't fluid. It wasn't the way he wanted it to be. And so I had to think of what to do. Now, I already had all the exam on him, and he was fine. So there wasn't like glasses question. It wasn't a hand-eye coordination issue. So we thought about it, and we developed a system based on something that had been out there previously, and something that is called a ring. So if you think about a hula hoop, a circle of about about a foot diameter. And think about putting 4 wiffle balls on that hoop opposite each other. And all 4 wiffle balls are different color, green, red, yellow, and so forth, and white. And if you throw that ring, it rotates, tumbles on itself, and it moves forward as well. And you can tell somebody grab the yellow ball as it does this. So that means they have to track the ball as it's moving, and they have to time a motor action to grab it at the right instant as the ring is spinning, right? Now that sounds pretty easy, but it's extremely difficult. Even if there's just 1 ball in the ring, it's extremely difficult. When you have 4 balls and you call out the color halfway when the ring is towards you, it's even more difficult. Well, so I brought to Fenway Park a ring with 1 ball, and I said, let's see if this is going to help Manny. I brought a ring with the 4 balls, but I've had a feeling that wouldn't be enough. And in fact, when I threw Manny the single ring, he caught the ball almost with his eyes closed. When I had the 4 balls, he caught every one of the ones I gave him easily. And he's basically said, Doc, this isn't doing anything for me. It's too easy. Fortunately, though, I had a 3rd ring. And this 3rd ring we actually created ourselves. And it was a ring that had baseballs with painted spin patterns. Each seam, when you throw it, the seams spin in such a way to create a pattern, a red dot, red lines, and so forth. And by that, the batter knows what kind of pitch it is and can judge where it's going to come as it crosses into the strike zone area, or as it approaches. And so we took 4 of those different spin patterns and put them, instead of the wiffle balls, on this ring. And threw the ring to Manny, and I said, fastball. Well, now we got one more level of difficulty because Manny had to recognize which ball pattern was the fastball and grab it appropriately. And he had trouble with that in the beginning. He got a little better as time went on, and he liked that a lot. And he actually did that every game throughout the rest of the 2004 season, throughout the rest of his career. It was the rings were now something that was in the locker, the chest that they traveled with when we went to away games. There was a trainer who was assigned to play ring toss with Manny before he went out on the field for batting practice. And Manny felt it was a way to kind of warm up the visual brain motor system without the strain of swinging a bat or hitting a baseball, to get that part warmed up before he went out and actually hit the baseball. He liked it so much that he, from what I was told, taught it to Derek Jeter, who was on a different team at the time, and taught it to other people as well. And those rings were available for sale to the public. Now they're actually going to be with another company, hopefully soon again. We call them Manny rings. And they're kind of the advanced, right? You want to start out with a single ball, wiffle ball, then go to 4 colored wiffle balls. And if you get good at that, you go to the Manny ring. And that's really the sign of excellence.
So it's basically simulating, noticing, picking up what pitch is coming and reacting.
Yeah,
without
it's
actually swinging a bat.
Yeah, picking up the pitch, making a decision about the pitch, projecting where that ball is going to be on the spinning ring when it gets to you, and making a perfectly timed motor action to grab it. Everything you would do when you're trying to hit a thrown baseball.
So that wasn't so much about vision improvement as it was, like you said earlier, with the decision-making part of the brain.
Well, it's visual-based decision-making, and it's visually-based motor actions, right? If you close your eyes, you're not going to catch the ring.
Right. It's going to catch you.
Really, yeah. It's all and that's where I think it's important to understand. Sports vision isn't just how good you see something. It's how well you see it and how well you then can use that information to do everything you need to perform at your sport.
That's amazing.
That's
fact, fascinating.
This is a great place to plug my book here, because I just wrote a book that we published last week on Amazon. It's called The Eye of the Champion. And it's not a medical book. It's intended for athletes, parents of athletes, and so forth, to understand all these different parts of the visual system that play a role in performance of sport. There's a chapter about vision sharpness, chapter about decision-making, chapter about bias, because there's lots of biases that can affect your vision, and chapters about how the brain decides whether it is and how it makes a motor action, how we test it, and so forth. It's gotten pretty good reception so far, and anyone who's interested, it's on Amazon. Eye of the Champion, and I think it's that and the Red Bull movie. You read the book, you watch the Red Bull movie, you should have lots of questions for, if you're an athlete or if you're the parent of an athlete, how you can improve your vision. And the truth is, not just even athletes. There's a vignette in there. It has a lot of vignettes of my experience. I had a patient who is fairly well known, who has a disease of the eyes that ruins the vision. It actually leads to blindness and hearing loss, because Usher syndrome. And so she was walking in New York, crossing streets, and having a lot of times getting hit by cars making turns, because she didn't have any peripheral vision because of this disease. And so what we did actually is train her to the vision she had to be able to react faster with it. So maybe she couldn't see it coming here, but once she got into the vision that she had, she'd be able to react faster and stop or get out of the way. Same techniques we use for athletes to react to sports. Here we applied it to a I shouldn't say non-athlete, because she's climbed Kilimanjaro and she's done all sorts of things, but to a non-professional athlete, to use the vision more efficiently to stay out of harm's way.
Well, that's fascinating. I'm definitely going to check out that Red Bull documentary, because it sounds great. You've already plugged the book, which is great. Is there anywhere else that you would? Is there a website, a YouTube, any social media that you do anything on that you'd like to plug? You can feel free to go right ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I have a YouTube channel, Sports Vision by Dr. Laby. 13 and a half, 14,000 almost subscribers. Put a video out every week. Some of the videos are more entertaining. For example, this week, well, I guess it's not entertaining. It's a video about Roberto Firmino from Liverpool a couple years ago. Got a finger in his left eye and had a potentially very serious injury. It's about that the injury he had and so forth. The highest viewed video I have on there is Thibaut Courtois' injury that he had a few years back. So there's some injury stuff, but there's also performance stuff. There's videos about the quiet eye that we mentioned briefly, about vision testing and so forth. I think I have 200 plus videos, 300. I don't know, it's like 5 million views, 9 million views. I can't keep track anymore, but there's a lot of videos there if people are interested. Medium, if you know the Medium, is kind of like the written YouTube. I have a bunch of articles, kind of blog-like things there about vision. My website is sportsvision.nyc, sportsvision, one word, .nyc. Instead of .com, it's .nyc. That's where I'm at. There's information there as well, and there's a way to get in touch with me. So if anyone wants to get in touch to ask a question, learn more, that's the place to do it. I try to respond as quickly as possible to all that.
That's great. It's a fascinating conversation. I learned a whole lot that I had no idea about. So, Daniel Laby, I appreciate your time. Thank you very much, and wish you good luck with the rest of spring training. And hopefully you get another ring this year, which your wife will make you give away.
We're hoping. Thanks, Scott. I appreciate it. Enjoyed it. And best to everybody.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks.